In this video, I'm going to be conducting a binomial test using JASP. I am using JASP version 0.14.1. If you are using a different version of JASP, the options you may see may look slightly different. If you have any questions related to JASP, please post them to the Canvas discussion board and include a screenshot of what you're seeing in JASP. In this example, I'll use the Palmer Penguins dataset. Here's the research question I'm going to address. Is the proportion of penguins who are identified as female different from 0.5? This is a two-tailed test because we want to know if the proportion is different from a given value. The null hypothesis is that theta equals 0.5, and the alternative hypothesis is that theta does not equal 0.5. In JASP, I will go to Frequencies, Binomial Test. I'll select Sex and move it to the Variables box. The default test value is 0.5, which is what we have in our hypotheses, so I do not need to change this. The default alternative hypothesis contains not equal to. In other words, the default is a two-tailed hypothesis test. We have a two-tailed hypothesis, so we do not need to change this. If we did have a right-tailed or left-tailed test, this is where we would give JASP that information. Now, let's look at our output. Our research question was about penguins identified as female, so we're going to look only at the row for females. There were 165 females in the total sample of 333 for a sample proportion of 0.495. The p-value here is the p-value for our hypothesis test. What this really means is that if the population proportion was really 0.5 and we took many random samples of 333 to build a distribution of sample proportions, 91.3% of those random samples would have a sample proportion of 0.495 or more extreme. In other words, if the population proportion were really 0.5, it would be fairly common to obtain a sample of 333 with 165 successes just due to random sampling error. If we go back to our hypotheses to make a decision, assuming a standard 0.05 alpha level, the p-value of 0.913 is greater than 0.05, so we fail to reject the null hypothesis. There is not evidence that the population proportion is different from 0.5. There is one last thing I want to show you in JASP, and that is the confidence interval option here. The default is a 95% confidence interval, but you can adjust that percentage here. This adds two columns onto our output with the lower and upper bounds. Again, let's just look at the row concerning females, since that's how our research question was worded. Our 95% confidence interval, estimating the proportion of all penguins who are female, is 0.441 to 0.551. To interpret this, I am 95% confident that in the population, between 44.1% and 55.1% of all penguins are female.